Lost media has been something I've spoken about on this channel before, specifically in my video covering Saki Sanobashi and the search that was started with intent of finding an anime that people weren't sure even existed. But lost media is more than just content of unknown origin. A statistic from the Library of Congress suggests that 75% of all silent films ever created are lost to time, meaning a good majority of the early film industry will never be seen again. Be it due to time, disaster, or intentional destruction, any media that has been permanently destroyed will be impossible to recover in its original form. Censorship, especially in recent years, has become a hot topic of debate for this reason. Preventing people from sharing their ideas and stories is one of the biggest drawbacks of censorship. Though, for our featured story of the day, the argument could be made that some stories are better left untold. Enter the 1992 movie Shoujo Tsubaki. The roughly 40-minute animation based off of a novel in the 80s was released to negative criticism. The Ero-Guro title is the story of a 12-year-old girl named Midori, whose life takes a turn for the worst following the rather graphic death of her mother. After finding her ill mother dead, being eaten by rats, she runs away, only to be taken into a traveling circus. Made into a slave by the ringleader of the freak show, Midori finds herself abused physically, verbally, and sexually by the other members of the group. The gang of freaks seems to be hell-bent on making Midori's life as miserable as possible. Any happiness that Midori finds, she quickly finds it taken away. When Midori is taking care of some dogs, Kanabun makes quick work of the innocent animals. I won't show what happens to them, but Kanabun deals them a rather gruesome fate, going so far as to stew and share the innocent animals as a meal with the rest of the circus. Abuse and mental anguish continues to befall poor Midori, with seemingly all of the adults in the circus abusing her however they please. That changes when a magician named Wonder Masamitsu joins the traveling freak show, taking an immediate liking to the young Midori. After being treated to nothing but hatred and abuse, a mentally weakened Midori takes comfort in the magician's love and affection. While it is nice to see her happy for once, it's immediately washed away when we realize that Masamitsu is a middle-aged man romancing a 12-year-old girl. Even this happiness doesn't last itself, as Masamitsu is shown to be just as manipulative and abusive himself. He kills the bandaged man for trying to show Midori his own form of twisted affection, and smashes the girl he's supposedly in love with against a mirror when she is seen taking an interest in becoming an actress. When a crowd isn't impressed with Masamitsu and his tricks, he begins to torture them through the use of magic. While the harm is not permanent, it's still graphic, and an experience the crowd surely won't forget. The argument could be made that, while Masamitsu was the only person of the circus to treat Midori with any kind of respect, or even kindness for that matter, he was even worse than the others. Being 3 to 4 times her age and preventing her from achieving her dream of escaping this horrible life, of being a glorified slave, is worse than if Masamitsu was to just pretend she never existed. The magician is selfish and egotistical. He merely pretended to want the best for Midori, when in reality he wanted to control her every move. As the freak show soon collapses, the group is forced to disband. As awful as they have been, it's almost like we're meant to feel bad for this group of criminals. In a massive juxtaposition from how brutal the freaks were, they happily bid farewell to Midori and Masamitsu. They're smiling and wishing the two the best. This is something I feel I still don't understand. It's almost as though they had been putting on an act the entire time. Even Midori says that she's going to miss them, and hopes to see them again in the future. My best guess would be that, after all the time that she had spent around the people who had brutally abused her, Midori had developed Stockholm Syndrome, or the psychological bond that a victim forms with those who mistreat them over long periods of time. Stockholm Syndrome is common in hostage situations, where the term was coined back in Sweden in 1973, or for victims of abuse like Midori. As it seems like Midori will finally get her twisted happy ending, Masamitsu goes to buy them some food, but he watches a man is thrown from his shop and is immediately stabbed by the attacker. Midori tries to find Masamitsu, but finds not only him, but the rest of the circus together. They're all laughing, but they're laughing at her. This is when Midori finally snaps, and she's seen beating away at the visions of the members of the freak show as if they were piñatas. This is a visual of Midori battling with her demons. It wasn't a nice ending for her to part ways with the people she had spent so much time together with. Midori's mind tricked her into thinking that she was friends with everybody. She realizes this, and even awakens to the fact that Masamitsu was no angel either. As Midori continues to fight off the memories of her abusers, the screen fades to black as the credits roll. A creepy tune plays out as the film comes to an end. The ending is rather ambiguous. There's no mention of what happens to Midori, and it isn't even known if she ever finds out that Masamitsu was murdered. But if I were to take a guess at the events, it would unravel like this. It isn't a surprise that Midori is in a very fragile emotional state, considering she likely wouldn't accept Masamitsu's advances had she not been given such awful treatment by the other members of the circus. This much is obvious. She was looking for anything to grab onto, which just so happened to be the manipulative attention of a middle-aged magician. After Masamitsu is stabbed, Midori stumbles upon his body. Seeing the only person in her life who had shown her love and affection since her mother passed having been murdered, her mind cannot bear to come to terms with reality that she would be alone again. That, or she would have to find another group of abusive performers that she had just escaped. Because of this, Midori snaps. While the rest of the film uses this sort of stop-and-go animation, everything was still in color. However, upon her mind finally breaking down from her anguish, the world around her turns white. She's fighting her demons in the forms of the people who had mistreated, assaulted, and harmed her. Then, everything goes quiet. Midori is alone in an empty space. That empty space being, of course, the representation of how Midori had nobody she could rely on. After everything she had experienced over the course of the film, there was no way that Midori could carry that heavy of a burden on her own. The song that plays through the ending credits is Midori's dread overwhelming her. No matter what she tried to do, there was no escaping the trauma that has been dealt. As the final lines of the song translate to, "I will never see you again," I believe that Midori ends up taking her own life, unable to cope with the trauma of what she had lived through, and nobody to confide in. This is what she sees as her only option. This movie was rough. From beginning to end, there is nothing to cheer the viewer up. Midori loses her mother in the first few minutes, and things only continue to spiral out of control until the very end. Even in the darkest shows I've seen, there have been times where there's a light-hearted scene or two that helps bridge the gap between the pain and suffering experienced by those on screen. Look at just about any series that deals with death and tragedy, and there will still likely be more happiness than what is found in Shoujo Tsubaki. Just a subtle joke or jab here and there is usually commonplace for something this dark. However, Shoujo Tsubaki never lets Midori or the viewer catch a break. And if you think it's just me who thinks this show is a bit too much with its heavy storyline, people who watched this movie in 1992 were so disturbed that they destroyed the very tapes they had watched it on. Much of the original movie as well was cut down due to Japanese censorship, which banned the film from being released. For a short time, Shoujo Tsubaki was thought to have any copies of its original animation destroyed, being deemed far too disturbing to watch. To be entirely honest, it is. This isn't a show I would wholeheartedly recommend to anybody, unless you enjoy being wholly depressed by watching somebody's never-ending suffering. There was also a live-action remake of the film, made in 2016, which was apparently changed from the original material. I have yet to watch the movie, and I haven't exactly worked up the strength or courage to sit through this misery again. I'm not exactly sure how much was changed, but there's only so much assault I can stomach before experiencing Shoujo Tsubaki in the live-action form. If I ever decide to do it, I'll be sure to make a video comparing to how much it differs from the animation. As I mentioned, I wouldn't recommend this story to many, if anyone at all. For as much of a reputation as it gets for being scary, it's certainly a bit oversold. Most of the creepiness comes from the aged art style, as well as the previously mentioned stop-and-go animation. Aside from a scene where Masamitsu is being booed by the audience, as well as the sequence with Kanabun and the dogs, Shoujo Tsubaki doesn't pack much of a punch in terms of horror. Still, this show isn't one that'll leave my mind anytime soon, no matter how much I try to push it out. As brutal as the show is, it's a narrative of how not every story we hear will have a happy or satisfying ending. Life isn't always kind. I've covered mostly cheerful anime on this channel. There's nothing that could compare to this. Shoujo Tsubaki is 47 minutes of nothing but watching a once innocent young girl suffer